Christmas Eve arrived in New York City the way it always does, loud, glowing, and full of movement. From the 10th floor of my apartment building, I could see the city performing its annual ritual. Strings of lights wrapped around street lamps like they were trying to hold the cold back. Shop windows shimmered with red and gold displays, promising warmth, joy, and belonging to anyone who stepped inside. Car horns echoed in short bursts, impatient but familiar, while snow drifted down slowly, softening the sharp edges of the night. Inside my apartment, none of that mattered. The heater hummed in the corner, doing its best, but the room still felt cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from winter air seeping through old windows. This was heavier, quieter, the kind that settles in your chest when you realize no one is coming. My name is Daniel Carter, and that night I learned how loud silence can be. I sat alone on the couch, still wearing my coat, as if part of me believed I might leave any second. A small artificial Christmas tree stood near the window, undecorated except for a single string of white lights I hadn't bothered to turn on. The boxes of ornaments were still shoved under the bed, untouched since the move. I had told myself I didn't need them. Decorations were for families, for people who had somewhere to go. On the coffee table sat my phone, face up, perfectly still. I checked the time for the fourth time in less than a minute, 8:46 p.m. Too early to sleep, too late to pretend this was just another night. I told myself I didn't care. I even laughed quietly at how dramatic the moment felt. After all, I was a grown man, not a child waiting for Santa. Loneliness shouldn't surprise someone my age. And yet, I kept staring at that phone. 6 months earlier, my marriage had ended in a lawyer's office that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. The divorce wasn't explosive, no shouting, no slammed doors, just two people who had slowly stopped knowing how to reach each other. We agreed to keep things civil, especially for my son. I nodded at all the right moments, signed where I was told, and walked out thinking I had handled it well. What I hadn't handled was what came after. The holidays had always been loud in our old home, too loud sometimes. Music playing while my wife cooked, my son arguing with the dog over dropped food, relatives talking over one another. I used to complain about the chaos. I used to crave quiet. Now I would have traded anything for that noise. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my palm lightly against the glass. Down on the street, a father lifted his daughter onto his shoulders, both of them laughing as snow landed in her hair. A couple hurried past, sharing an umbrella, their hands locked together like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt invisible. My phone buzzed suddenly. My heart jumped so fast it almost hurt, but it was just a notification from a food delivery app reminding me of a discount I didn't want. I exhaled slowly, embarrassed by my own reaction. And then the truth finally caught up to me. I wasn't just alone that night. I was waiting for a message, waiting for a call, waiting for proof that I still mattered to someone, especially to my son. I picked up the phone again, hesitating before unlocking it, afraid of what I wouldn't see. No missed calls, no messages. I imagined him laughing somewhere else, surrounded by people, forgetting that his father was sitting in a quiet apartment counting minutes. I told myself to be patient. I told myself he was just busy. But deep down, a question I didn't want to face kept repeating in my head. What if he didn't think of me at all tonight? I set the phone back down and turned away, unaware that in just a few minutes, everything I believed about that night and about myself was about to change. I had just turned away from the window when the sound finally came. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft vibration against the wooden surface of the coffee table. My phone. For a second, I didn't move. I stood there, frozen, afraid that if I reacted too fast, I might break whatever fragile moment was unfolding. The apartment felt impossibly still, as if even the walls were waiting to see what I would do. Then the screen lit up. Ethan. My son's name glowed against the darkness like a lifeline. I grabbed the phone so quickly I nearly dropped it, my thumb hovering over the screen for half a heartbeat before I answered. I expected excitement. I expected a cheerful, "Merry Christmas, Dad!" I even expected awkward small talk. What I didn't expect was silence. Not the kind where the call fails to connect, but the kind where someone is there and doesn't know how to begin. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, forcing warmth into my voice. "What's up?" A shaky breath came through the speaker, then another. "Dad," he whispered. That single word landed heavier than anything else could have. I straightened instantly, my chest tightening, as if my body understood the danger before my mind did. "What's wrong?" I asked, already stepping closer to the window without realizing why. Ethan talked to me. His breathing cracked, uneven and desperate, like he was trying to hold himself together and failing. I could hear noise in the background, music, clinking plates, distant laughter, a Christmas gathering, full, alive, and somehow he was alone in it. "I don't feel good here," he said finally, his voice breaking apart halfway through the sentence. "Everyone's busy, Dad. Mom keeps saying she'll talk to me later, but later never comes." I closed my eyes. In that instant, the quiet apartment around me disappeared. All I could see was my son, 12 years old, standing somewhere he didn't feel seen, trying to be brave because he thought that was what was expected of him. "Are you safe?" I asked, my voice low and steady despite the storm inside me. "Yes," he answered quickly. I don't know where to go." That sentence tore straight through me. I thought about all the times I had told myself he was fine without me, all the excuses I had accepted because they were easier than fighting, all the nights I convinced myself that staying quiet was the same as being strong. I was wrong. "You did the right thing by calling me," I said. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He sniffed, trying to pull himself together. "I didn't want to ruin Christmas." I laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. You could never ruin anything by telling the truth. I walked toward the door, my free hand already reaching for my coat. My movements felt automatic, like my body had taken control before doubt could interfere. "Dad," he said, "where are you going?" "I'm standing up," I replied. "That's all you need to know right now." I slipped my boots on, fumbling with the laces. My heart was pounding, not from panic, but from clarity. For the first time that night, the loneliness loosened its grip, replaced by something sharper and more powerful. Purpose. "Can you stay on the phone with me?" he asked. "As long as you want," I said, without hesitation. While I wrapped a scarf around my neck, he told me small things, how loud the living room felt, how he didn't want to seem ungrateful, how everyone kept asking him why he was so quiet. I listened to every word like it mattered, because it did. Each step I took toward the door felt like reclaiming something I thought I had lost. Before hanging up to step into the cold night, I paused for just a moment, standing in the doorway of my empty apartment. The silence was still there, but it no longer felt accusing. It felt temporary. "Dad," Ethan said softly, "I'm really glad you answered." "So am I," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "More than you know." I stepped outside, the door closing behind me, unaware that this call wasn't just pulling me out into the city, it was pulling me back into my own life. The cold hit me the moment I stepped outside, sharp and immediate, like New York was testing whether I truly meant to leave the safety of my apartment. Snowflakes drifted down lazily, dissolving the second they touched my coat, while the sidewalk glistened under streetlights that had seen 1,000 Christmases before this one. I pulled my scarf tighter and adjusted the phone against my ear, grounding myself in the sound of Ethan's breathing. "You still there?" he asked quietly. "I'm right here," I said. "I'm not hanging up."
The city moved around me in layers. A group of people spilled out of a bar, laughing too loudly, their cheeks red from warmth and alcohol. A delivery truck idled at the curb, its engine rumbling like a restless animal. Somewhere, a saxophone played a slow, lonely tune that echoed between buildings, turning the street into something cinematic and painfully real all at once. I walked fast, my boots splashing through half-melted snow, every step fueled by a feeling I hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't anger or regret, it was urgency, the kind that comes when something important is finally clear. Ethan talked while I listened, about how everyone kept asking him what gifts he'd gotten, about how his cousins were glued to their phones, about how he felt stupid for being sad when everything looked so perfect from the outside. "I didn't want to be the problem," he admitted. "You're not a problem," I replied immediately. "You're my son." The words came out stronger than I expected, like they had been waiting their turn. I realized then how carefully I had been choosing my words since the divorce, afraid to say the wrong thing, afraid to make promises I might not be allowed to keep. Tonight, fear felt irrelevant. I descended into the subway station, the air growing warmer and heavier as the familiar scent of metal and electricity wrapped around me. The platform was nearly empty, just a few tired faces scattered along the edge, each person locked inside their own thoughts. The train arrived with a howl, doors sliding open like an invitation I didn't hesitate to accept. I found a seat and leaned forward, elbows on my knees, phone pressed to my ear. "Dad?" Ethan said again, softer this time. "Are you mad at Mom?" The question caught me off guard. I stared at the floor of the train, watching my reflection flicker across the polished surface as we moved. "No," I said after a moment. "I'm not mad. Grown-up things are complicated, but none of that changes how I feel about you." He was quiet, processing that. "I thought maybe you didn't want to come. Mom said you needed space." I swallowed hard. "I never needed space from you. I just didn't know how to ask for more time." The train rocked gently, a steady rhythm beneath us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt different from the one in my apartment earlier, not empty, but shared. When I emerged back onto the street, the snow had thickened, covering footprints almost as soon as they appeared. The city felt softer now, quieter, as if it sensed something important was happening and chose not to interfere. My hands were numb from the cold, but my chest felt warm in a way it hadn't all night. "I can see your building," I told him as I turned onto his block. "Really?" His voice lifted, hope slipping through the cracks of his sadness. "Yeah," I said, "it's all lit up." I slowed my pace, suddenly aware of my heartbeat, of the weight of the moment approaching. This wasn't just about picking him up or making the night better. It was about showing up, physically, emotionally, without hesitation. "I'm glad you called me," I said as I stopped across the street from the building. "Me too," he replied. "I was scared you wouldn't answer." I looked up at the windows glowing against the snowy sky, feeling the truth of that statement settle deep inside me. "Next time," I said firmly, "don't ever be afraid to reach me." I crossed the street, snow crunching beneath my boots, knowing that whatever waited behind that door would change the shape of this Christmas, and maybe much more than that. The building door was heavier than I remembered, or maybe my hands were shaking too much to pull it open smoothly. Warm air rushed out as soon as I stepped inside, carrying the scent of roasted meat, cinnamon, and something sweet baking somewhere upstairs. It was the smell of a full house, of people gathering, of a Christmas that was already happening without me. I paused just inside the lobby, suddenly aware of how out of place I felt. My coat was dusted with snow, my boots wet and scuffed, my heart pounding like I was about to walk into an exam I hadn't studied for. For a brief moment, doubt tried to creep back in. I wondered if I was interrupting something, if I was about to make things awkward, if I should have stayed quiet like I had so many times before. Then I heard footsteps. Ethan came around the corner, his face flushed, his eyes red, his sweater slightly too big for him, like he'd grown faster than anyone noticed. He stopped the second he saw me, just stood there, frozen, as if his brain needed proof before his body could react. "Dad?" he said, barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He ran. The impact knocked the air out of me as he wrapped his arms around my waist and buried his face into my coat. I held him just as tightly, one hand pressed between his shoulders, the other cradling the back of his head. He smelled like shampoo and sugar cookies, and something inside my chest finally gave way. "I thought you were just saying that," he mumbled. "I didn't think you'd actually come." I pulled back just enough to look at him. "I will always come," I said, my voice rough but steady. "You just have to tell me you need me." He nodded against my chest, gripping my coat like it was the only solid thing in the world. Behind him, his mother stood near the hallway, watching us. She looked tired. Not angry, not defensive, just worn down in the way people get when they're trying to do too much and failing quietly. "I didn't realize he was this upset," she said softly. "I didn't realize either," I replied, keeping my voice calm. This wasn't the moment for blame, it was the moment for honesty. She sighed and stepped aside, giving us space. "You can take him outside for a bit," she offered. "He's been overwhelmed all night." Ethan looked up at me, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Is that okay?" "It's more than okay," I said. "Let's get some air." We sat on the front steps, the snow still falling gently around us, muffling the sounds of the city. The lights from inside spilled onto the sidewalk, creating a soft glow that felt strangely intimate. Ethan leaned against me, his shoulder fitting under my arm like it always had, even though he was taller now. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he broke the silence. "I didn't know who I was supposed to be tonight. Everyone kept asking me if I was happy." "And were you?" I asked. He shook his head. "I felt like I was pretending, like I was smiling so no one would ask questions." I looked down at him, really looked at him, and felt a sharp ache of guilt. I had missed this version of him, the quieter one, the one who carried too much on his own. "You don't have to pretend with me, ever." He let out a long breath, the kind you release when you realize you've been holding it in for too long. "When I called you, I thought maybe you wouldn't want to deal with it, like I was bothering you." The words hit me harder than the cold ever could. "I need you to hear this," I said, turning my body so he had my full attention. "You are never a burden to me, not on Christmas, not on any day." His eyes filled again, but this time the tears didn't fall. He just nodded, biting his lip, trying to be brave. We sat there longer than we probably should have, watching the snow collect on the railing, listening to the distant sounds of the city. In that quiet space between us, something shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. When we finally stood up, Ethan's grip on my hand was lighter, not because he needed me less, but because he trusted I wasn't going anywhere. As we headed back toward the building, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe before. I hadn't just shown up for my son. I had finally shown up for myself. We didn't go back inside right away. Ethan hesitated at the door, his hand still in mine, his eyes flicking between the warm glow of the hallway and the dark street behind us. I could tell he was torn between what was expected of him and what he actually wanted.
I recognized that look too well. I had worn it for years. "You don't have to decide anything right now," I said gently. "We can just walk for a bit." His shoulders relaxed just slightly, and he nodded. So we walked. The snow had settled into a steady fall, softening the city into something quieter, more forgiving. Christmas music drifted faintly from apartment windows above us, muffled and imperfect, like it belonged to people who were still figuring things out. The sidewalks were almost empty now, the earlier rush replaced by calm. Ethan kicked at the snow as we moved, hands stuffed into his pockets. After a few blocks, he spoke again. "Do you think things will always feel this weird?" he asked. "Like broken but not broken enough for people to notice?" The question stopped me in my tracks. I crouched slightly so we were eye level. "I think some things stay uncomfortable for a while," I said carefully, "but that doesn't mean they're permanent. It just means they're changing." He considered that, then shrugged. "I don't really like change." "Neither do I admitted. "But sometimes it's the only way we learn what matters." We ended up sitting on a low stone wall near a small park, the kind you only notice when you slow down enough to see it. The trees were bare, their branches etched against the gray sky, and the ground was covered in untouched snow. It felt like a pause button had been pressed on the world. Ethan leaned against me, his head resting on my shoulder. He was quiet for a long time, and I didn't rush him. Some moments need space more than words. "I thought you were happier without us," he said eventually, so softly I almost missed it. That one hurt. I stared ahead, choosing honesty over comfort. "I thought I was supposed to be," I said. "I thought being quiet meant I was handling things well, but I wasn't happier, I was just alone." He shifted, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. "I didn't want to make it worse." "You didn't," I said firmly. "You made it real." He smiled at that, a small, tired smile, but a genuine one, the kind that doesn't perform for anyone. After a while, his breathing slowed, his weight settling heavier against me. He was exhausted, emotionally, mentally, in ways a child shouldn't have to be. I adjusted my arm around him, steady and protective. For the first time that night, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I still had. When we finally stood to head back, Ethan looked calmer, not magically fixed, not suddenly joyful, just safer. "It's glad you live close," he said as we walked. "It makes the city feel smaller." I smiled. "It does that sometimes." We stopped at the building again. This time he let go of my hand first. "Will you call me tomorrow?" he asked. "I won't wait that long. I'll text you when I get home." He nodded, then hesitated before stepping inside. "Dad?" "Yeah. Thank you for coming." I watched him disappear down the hallway, and then stood there for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle around me again. But it wasn't the same quiet as before. This one didn't accuse, it didn't echo, it felt earned. The walk back to my apartment was slow, not because I was tired, but because I didn't feel the need to rush anymore. The city lights reflected off the snow like scattered stars, and for the first time all night, I noticed how beautiful it was. Back inside my apartment, I turned on the little Christmas tree. The white lights flickered to life, soft and imperfect, but warm. My phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "I'm okay now. Sleep well, Dad." I sat down on the couch, the silence wrapping around me gently this time, and finally allowed myself to breathe. That Christmas didn't give me a celebration. It didn't give me a second chance at the past. It gave me something quieter and far more important. It reminded me that being needed is not a weakness, that showing up matters, that love doesn't disappear, it waits. And sometimes, all it takes to find your way back is the courage to answer the call.